Chief Exosurgeon Hestian was convinced that in order to understand a system's failure, one first had to have an intimate knowledge of its parts. He extended a thin, four-jointed finger towards the human specimen stretched out on the dissection table, his voice a carefully modulated baritone sounding through the laboratory. The specimen, a male marine contaminant alpha, had been a byproduct of the first pacification attempt on the mudball planet below. An untidy, but ultimately rewarding capture. "Observe well, Alkalite Peer," Hestian spoke, his own voice pitched low to match the ambient frequencies of the ship. "It is important that we get a baseline on this creature's rough architecture. Only then can we properly value the stunning economy of its systemic failure when starved." Peer stood a regulation 2 paces behind, his own silver robes a testament to antiseptic excellence. His smooth alabaster face was a masterfully created facade of learned interest, but his eyes kept darting to the specimen's heavy facial hair with a trace of distaste. "Its external configuration is a litany of inefficiencies, Chief Exosurgeon, the redundant manual digits, the disorganized positioning of its primary sensory organs, the confounding bilateral symmetry, mere surface-level vulgarities." Hestian adjusted his tone, teacher-like in patience with a slow student. "The real architectural monstrosity is inside." He picked up a plasma scalpel from a hovering tray, its cutting edge a silent, contained stream of pure energy. In a gesture of fluid ease, one he had practiced over centuries of autopsies, he drew a line between the marine sternum and belly button. The sterile air, long smelling only of recycled oxygen and atomized cleaners, thickened suddenly with the coppery organic smell of hemoglobin. The wet, primal stench. Pierre's olfactory vents contracted in a spasm of reflexive revulsion. Our own internal digestion core, a miracle of biomechanics, breaks down nutrients with total conversion. None is wasted. Hestian preached, his voice rising to the hubris of an entity that saw digestion as a solved problem. The Terran digestive system, on the other hand, is a chemical sludge vat of a primitive sort, a churning acid stew of biological chaos, a testament to evolutionary penny pinching. He laid down the scalpel and activated a magnetized plate with a quiet click. He stretched into the cavity of the abdomen, his gloved, cell structure manipulating, microstructure weaving fingers curved around a slippery coiled tube. Its soft, wet plop as he pulled it up seemed to stick to the sterilized air, a rebellious whisper of life in a space meant for its absence. "This," he declared, holding aloft a loop of the small intestine as one might hold up evidence of a crime, "is the main apparatus of absorption, a unnecessarily twisted and wet organ." He pulled out, expecting to pull out a modest, self-contained section of tissue. He was hoping for a few feet at most, a reasonable figure for an organism this size. The organ, though, unreeled out of the body like a runway cable, a rosy coiled cord that he started to deposit on the sterile tray adjacent to the slab. He set down the initial loop neatly. The organ then continued to spool. He added a second loop, then a third. The stack on the tray increased from a neat coil to a chaotic mound, then a heap. His refinement-forced composition collapsed. Pierre, whose self-control was his greatest asset, involuntarily took one step back. His chiseled features, a moment before a facade of academic detachment, now betrayed a flash of unadulterated horror. The sheer amount of it was obscene. It was anatomically gratuitous. Hestian's own placid composure started to crack at the edges. His motions lost their fluid ease, becoming jerky and frenzied, like a coder struggling with a knotted cluster of fiber optic wire. It pulled, and another yard of the organ came out, wet and seemingly endless. The stack grew bigger, overflowing the edges of the tray and thudding onto the spotless white floor with a gentle wet slap that caused both of them to wince. This was not biology, it was an insult to the body. It defied every principle of simple, elegant design known to man. How could any living being possibly function with this amount of inside plumbing? It was biological equivalent to a starship constructed out of nothing but exhaust pipes. He pulled again, with more force this time. A burst of pure frustration shattering his clinical reserve. Another meter of the organ came free, uncoiling with a rebellious squelch. He glared at the obscene pile of tissue, a gut mound that now occupied most of his lab space. He looked back at the half-empty human cavity, then at the pile, and the very basis of his biological knowledge started to shake. This was no ordinary misfit. It was an intentional architectural insult to reason itself. This beast had more intestine than was decently proper. He let go of the length he was grasping back into the heap with a wince. His voice, when at last he could speak, was no longer patronizing. It was low and bewildered hiss of shock, a sound that cut through the clinical air and left a gash. "Why is it so long?" Sergeant Maria came to in a tide of aching pain, a confusion fog and the lingering taste of metal from a stun blast. She was lying on a cold floor, a smooth metallic floor that seemed to be actively sucking heat out of her body. Her headache came with a beat that indicated a company of heavy boots was patrolling through her head. A swift, methodical count habituated by 100 hostile environments showed all limbs there and all present, though each was standing in stern, formal objection. No signs of calamitous damage apparent. She struggled up. Her eyes, a spinning vortex of gray, gradually cohered into an unbroken cube of monolithic, featureless metal. No seams were visible, no bolts, no rivets. Each surface merged into the next in a ghoulish monument to hygienic perfection. The result was deeply disorienting. A room that gave the eyes no hold, and yet the minimalist aesthetic had its weaknesses. Small breaks in its suffocating uniformity. A thin slit along the floor was a waste disposal unit. High on one wall, a ventilation grill droned a low, monotonous melody. One pipe, glistening with condensation, traveled along the bottom of another wall, and in the vicinity of the floor, almost blending in with the gray, was the very thin hairline edge of a service panel. "Hey, Sanye. My head hurts like I punched it with my head." A low voice groaned somewhere in the room. Corporal Gibson was turning onto his side, his huge body ridiculously cramped and out of place in the sterile capsule. He blinked his big, soft eyes, which then blurred as his hand went automatically to his stomach. And worse, "I'm starving." "Suffer vitals," a more subdued voice reported. Expert Anna was already sitting up, her fingers against the pulse point in her neck. Her face, one of clinical detached observation, remained minor head trauma, force concussive with their energy weapons. "Something a few hours, a ration pack, and a good night's sleep won't cure." "A fat chance on the ration pack part," growled Gibson, heaving himself into a sitting position. His belly made a statement of its own, punctuating with a gurgle that shook the tiny space, a wet, insolent, desperately biological sound in a sarcophagus of silent machinery. "Concentrate," Maria told him, voice a rough rasp that grated her throat. "Where are we?" "A holding cell, Sergeant," Anna replied, her gaze sweeping the claustrophobic uniformity with a critical glance. "Alaran design philosophy, minimalist, efficient, and psychologically demoralizing. And hunger-inducing," Gibson supplemented, rubbing his stomach as if to placate it. As if at his prompting, a portion of the wall before them shimmered like a heat mirage. A hologram coalesced into the face of an Alaran, tall and slender, like those they had battled, its silver jumpsuit blending into the gray surround. It lacked any visible face, only a smooth, egg-shaped head that inclined with an unsettling lack of bodily need. A translated voice, as chilly and clinical as the room, filled the space. "You are subjects in a Terran deprivation tolerance study." "Oh, great," Maria grumbled to herself. "Science experiment. I was hoping they'd give me a firing squad." "Your life processes will be maintained as they naturally come to an end," the hologram went on, its voice free of anything like malice or pity. "No food will be supplied. This conforms to the starvation doctrine, which has been found 100% effective against all 63 species the Imperium has brought to the light." "Enlightenment? You starved them all to death?" The Alaran hologram, that had presented itself as Administrator 7, appeared to detect the noise. A tiny ripple swept across its clean head. Your species' grossly inefficient metabolic rate is well documented. According to our analysis, your total capitulation to biological reality can be anticipated within 3 of your standard days. We will watch your degeneration with great scientific interest. The hologram flickered and vanished, plunging them back into the humming, antiseptic silence. For a long moment nobody spoke. The finality of the sentence settled over them like a cold, heavy blanket. 3 days. That wasn't a threat. It was a diagnosis. Well, Gibson replied, ending the silence as he hauled his giant body to its feet. I guess I'm starving to death. I knew all along it would be this way. I just figured it'd be because I'd forgotten my wallet at a buffet. Maria was already standing, dismissing his gallows humor. Her engineer's vision wasn't viewing a prison, she was viewing a system, a defective one. The ventilation cover was an outdated model, a retrofit, a hack job, a possible exit. Gibson, grab me, she instructed, gesturing to the grate. Let's go see what this classy toaster oven lid is constructed of. Gibson, relieved to be working, jammed his stubby fingers into the thin slits of the grate. Maria found her own hold on the other side, her smaller, rougher hands closing around the cold metal. On 3, she strained. 1, 2, 3. They pulled. Gibson's back muscles tightened, his back arching against the unmoving metal. A low grunt sounded in the cell, a deep bass protest from the wall where the grate was secured. The metal itself refused to bend, refused to flex, refused to crack. It was a new alloy. It was dark and heavy. Nothing, Gibson gasped. Releasing, his fingertips were raw and red. It's like attempting to bend a section of a dreadnought's hull. Anana drew a finger along the rim of the grate, her touch gentle. Some sort of carbon matrix metal. Tensile strength is likely to be astronomical. It's not ornamental, it's load-bearing. They framed the wall around it. Maria gazed at the grate, her jaw muscle clenching. Then her gaze swept the room a second time, committing each detail to memory. An escape was out of the question. That left survival. Her mouth curled up into a thin, hard smile that was closer to a snarl than to humor. They made 2 mistakes, Maria stated, her tone hard and clear. Ana arched her eyebrow. Only 2? I count at least 5, beginning with their interior designer. First, Maria said, her eyes now stuck on the faint, damp, earthy odor coming from that very impassable grate. They stuck us in an old section of the ship. This area is likely close to the secondary cargo bay, right where they hauled all the lander's wreckage. And the second error? Gibson questioned, a glint of real curiosity in his eyes. Maria smiled, and it reached to her eyes. They were cold and hard, like bits of flint. They said we had 3 days to live. The first 24 hours were a cruel, grinding introduction to what real hunger felt like. It wasn't merely the rumble in the belly. It was a soul-hollowing, a seeping mist that descended into the head and made every thought labor through glue. Gibson, normally a limitless well of brash energy and terrible puns, was forced to pace the cell in laborious, jerky loops, his massive body seeming to shrink with each hour. He began recounting food eaten, his voice weakening with each retold meal. Maria wasn't pacing, though. She was hunting. Her trained mind, capable of taking apart fusion drives and cracking encrypted security systems, was now intent on taking apart their jail for spares. She passed her hand over each surface, tapping, listening for density variations, looking for one vulnerable spot. Nina, on the other hand, had discovered hers. In the microscopic seam where the condensation pipe joined the wall, there was growth, a dark, fuzzy patch of what appeared to be mold, no larger than her thumbnail, flourished in the constant dampness. Fascinating, she whispered. Scrap had off a tiny sample with her nail. She held it up close to her eyes, examining its texture. A fungus from the ground. A spore must have caught a ride on our equipment, most likely from Gibson's boot. There's constant condensation here that has provided an ideal microclimate for it to grow. Then we can consume it? Gibson questioned. his voice a low growl. He had ceased pacing and now watched Anna with the single-minded intensity of a starving wolf seeing a three-legged bunny. Technically, Anna replied, sniffing the sample. Its aroma profile would indicate damp earth ammonia and a trace of old socks, but it seems to be a mycelial mat high in protein. It will probably taste like dirt and piss, but technically it's nutritious. I'll take it, Gibson replied instantly. But their actual breakthrough was a miracle of circumstance, a skittering testament to the tenacity of life. A faint scratching noise had Maria's focus on the vent. A second later, a small multi-legged beast with hard plating and quivering antennae wriggled out. It was a skitter, a robust vermin of the plastic colony planet they'd been taken from. It was ugly. It was likely diseased. But the unpleasant little creature was home. Before Maria or Anna could even respond, Gibson reacted. His slowness was gone, replaced by an appalling flash of predator quickness. He hurled himself forward. One of his giant hands clapped down on the creature. There was a weak, ungratifying crunch. He curled back his hand, exposing the trembling, stunned skitter. He glared down at it, then at his teammates, a victorious, nearly savage smile spreading across his face. Appetizer. They had provisions, a tiny, quivering, likely deadly appetizer. Now they had a new issue. Heating it. They needed fire. Maria's gaze returned to the service panel that she'd noticed before. It took Gibson's brute force to lever a corner out, using a thin strip of metal that he'd been able to break from the bottom of his bunk frame. In there were two heavy insulated power cables side by side. High voltage. A lovely lethal view. All right, Maria stated, her tone low and intense, the engineer in her asserting itself. New plan. We're not creating an ark. We're creating a stove. She had Gibson remove the insulation from a small part of each conduit, revealing the shiny metal inside. This is an old system. The breakers will be slow for managing small power fluctuations. We'll have perhaps 30 seconds before the breakers trip and the entire conduit is dead for an hour. Gibson had already honed the metal fragment from the bunk frame on the floor, so we cook fast. Right, Maria grabbed the shard. We're going to insert this between the positive and negative leads. It'll form a direct short. The resistance in the shard will warm it up like a toaster element, if we're lucky. And if not? Anne inquired, watching with scientific interest. Then it either melts, blows up, or bonds to the conduits, and we never get to do this again, Maria answered dully. Gibson, prepare the rat. Anna, stand by to knock the shard loose if it begins to melt. Slowly, slowly. Her hands rock steady. Maria jammed the metal sliver between the two exposed conduits. Nothing. Then the lights in the cell flickered slightly. A low, enraged buzz came from the wall. The metal sliver started to glow, first dull gray, then cherry red, then a blazing burning orange that threw flashing shadows across their set faces. Now, Maria spat. Gibson pushed the impaled skitter at the searing hot metal. Instant sizzle, a loud pop, and a wispy tendril of smoke rose, bearing a stench that was other and unpleasant but unmistakably the smell of broiling meat. They labored in tense, wordless harmony, rotating the creature, burning its flesh against the primitive heating element. After 20 seconds that felt like an eternity, the hum from the wall cut out with a loud clunk. The shard's angry glow faded back to gray. They had done it. They possessed a chunk of cooked meat no larger than the size of a man's fist. It was burnt on the outside, and likely raw in the center. But it was the most gorgeous thing any of them had ever laid eyes on, a primal, messy, beautiful smell of rebellion in a clean, desperate environment. In his spotless laboratory, light years from the idea of a barbecue, Hestian gazed at a holographic screen, filling with a slow, intellectual distaste that threatened to become nausea. The test results on Containment Alpha's gut biome samples had arrived, and they were a sacrilege against the clean, elegant principles of effective biology. A symbiotic cesspool, he grumbled to Pierre, who was faithfully recording the information with a stylus that never made contact with the screen. See here, Thousands of unique microbial species, each jostling and working together in a randomized, uncontrolled stew. The biological version of taking a sledgehammer to pry open a data chip, a riot in a petri dish. His models based on the samples were even more alarming. They indicated the biome was capable of degrading complex polymers, cellulose, chitin, even plastics, to remarkable, if ghastly sloppy, effect. Not a digestive system, a feral bioreactor. A small warning, a gentle, unobtrusive chime, came from his auxiliary console. He looked at it, annoyed by the distraction. Atmospheric anomaly detected, sector Gamma 9. He expanded the report. Unidentified organic particulates, high carbon dioxide, trace methane, all confined to the detention block. He did not ignore it. An honest scientist recorded all information, regardless of how anomalous or distasteful. He created a new log entry, his long fingers flying across the holographic keyboard. Fascinating, he whispered, a spark of intellectual interest briefly glossing over his distaste. Hypothesis. The Terran process of decomposition is surprisingly unstable. As the live specimen's cellular matrix deteriorates due to starvation, they're off-gassing high molecular weight organic chemicals. An interesting new data point on their system failure. The air itself around them is proof of their decay. He submitted the report under terminal stage biomarkers and directed his complete focus again to the main console, calling up the live biofeed from the prisoner's cell. He wanted to observe the beautiful, orderly process of starvation in action. The moment-to-moment data stream revealed precisely what he anticipated: slowed down metabolic rates, increased stress hormones, spotty REM sleep. The curve was tracking wonderfully toward systemic failure. He moved in, prepared to observe nature in its limitless efficiency fix a sloppy biological mistake. 3 days went by, then 5, then 7. The Alleran's formal countdown to the human's death arrived and passed, uncelebrated and unmarked. Within the cell, a somber but efficient cycle had been put into place. They were able to capture one additional skitter on day 4, and then the vent went quiet. The miracle spread had shut down shop. Their diet was now 2 major food groups, mold and wall. The patch of mold, neatly grown by Anna like a blue ribbon orchid, extended along the condensation pipe. They picked it in small, controlled quantities, which Anna termed their vitamin and protein supplement. Gibson described it as pipe cheese. But the real mainstay of our diet is insulation from the power conduit. Maria had asked herself after their second rat what the fibrous, pale yellow stuff was. A hasty, desperate taste test established it was not only fire retardant but also, in a very desperate kind of way, palatable. Anna had run the molecular analysis by chewing on a small sample for a few minutes, her face contemplative. Cellulose-based biopolymer, she announced, swallowing. Tastes like despair, to our gut biome. It's essentially cardboard, highly processed inorganic cardboard. So they ate the wall. It was dry and chalky, a dense dust that scraped their gums raw and tickled their throats as it went down. But it was something. It was fuel. Gibson, bony but oddly energized, ripped off strips with his bare fingers. By the end of a week on this regimen, the torpid weakness of the initial days had passed, leaving a coiled, wiry energy, lean efficiency of a predator in famine. Maria observed him ripping into a new strip of insulation with a grimace. "You're less corpse-like and more cornered wolf," Gibson growled, chewing to a rhythmic grind of his jaw. "Yeah, cornered wolves eat. This tastes better than nothing, a little like a really, really stale biscuit." Their cell, once a shrine to all sterility, was no longer so. The air had a lingering faint veil of ozone, and something wetly organic. A tidy little mound of skitter bones was piled in one corner. Insulation around the power conduit was shreddedly torn, revealing more of the shiny metal underneath. It was no longer a cage. It was a den. Chief Exosurgeon Hestian paced the 10th reading, his 4-jointed fingers tapping a mad, soundless rhythm on the rim of his console. His frustration was hardening into a more noxious feeling, bewilderment. The subjects were persistently failing to track the correct arc of decline. Their biosigns were all awry. Their heart rates were steady. Their core temperatures were typical. Their waste quotient was regular. Frustrated, he changed over from his beautiful charts and graphs to the high-resolution video feed, something he did not do often. Prolonged stares at the rough-looking organisms were aesthetically unpleasing. He zoomed in, his scientific eye hoping against hope for the evidence of decay that he knew must be present. He found them right away, or so he assured himself. He stood by, observing as Maria slowly ripped off a piece of the conduit insulation and proceeded to chew it, her face set in a grim determination. "Excellent," Hestian breathed, making a note. "The pica has begun, a definite neurological symptom of terminal malnutrition. Eating non-food material, a last instinctual madness fueled by a starving brain." He watched Gibson pacing the cell, not slowly but with an agitated hunting energy, his big body wound up tight like a spring. A final surge of hunting instinct, Hestian noted, feeling increasingly confident with each imperfect observation. The body is breaking down its own muscle tissue for one final useless dissipation of energy before complete systemic collapse. A telltale sign. He watched Anaz scraping the foul mold culture into a small, tidy heap. He saw the small pile of neatly picked clean bones in the corner. He saw everything. And he saw everything through the flawless, unchallenged lens of his own brilliance and authoritative teaching. Everything they did to keep from dying, he read as a sign of their eventual demise. His scientific mind didn't simply reel. It constructed a structure of false reasoning around a center of utter conviction. He wasn't merely watching. He was composing a story. And in his story, the humans were already dead. They were simply too crude to lie down. It wasn't until Administrator 7 reached out to him, its synthesized voice taut with something that could have been revulsion, that there was a small fissure in Hestian's fortress. "Exosurgeon, their waste production has been constant. This is contrary to all 63 previous models of deprivation. Ergonomic waste production resulted in ergonomic energy consumption. It was biological nonsense. A thermodynamic impossibility. For the first time in a career spanning decades, Hestian experienced a spasm of real doubt, a cold, sick feeling that he promptly pushed away. The model didn't lie. The subjects were merely aberrant. Anani called for a lesson in science. She picked up a sharpened rat's bone and started scratching a diagram out on the metal floor of the cell. The noise was grating and clear in the stillness. "All right. Pay attention," she said, her voice in a strange academic excitement that was completely alien to their bleak environment. The Alorans committed a basic species-level mistake. They observed all of biology and viewed nothing but defects. They saw this. She sketched out a great, looping, absurdly complicated sequence on the ground. "Our digestive system." Gibson grunted, knowing the shape from his own rudimentary biology classes. "Ugly sucker, isn't it? Looks like a spilled plate of noodles." To an Aloran, whose entire digestive system is a single beautiful organ the size of my fist, this is a nightmare of inefficiency. Anna described, tapping the drawing with her bone stylus. All absurdly long intestines, the very thing that surgeon likely discovered so strange and awful, serve one purpose: to optimize nutrient uptake from low-quality, hard-to-digest food. We evolved as scavenging omnivores. We were constructed to consume whatever we could find: roots, insects, carrion, week-old remains, you name it. She stabbed a place deep within the coils. And here, behold our secret weapon, our gut bacteria. Billions of them. A whole civilization of microbes that have co-evolved with us. That biome can digest complex fibers like the cellulose in this insulation. Stuff that would go right through an Aloran, or worse, kill them from the inside. Maria gazed at the diagram, her face slow to crack into a dangerous smile. "So our greatest biological vulnerability is the reason that we're still alive." Anna completed, her eyes aglow with intellectual fire. "Their biology is a high-performance racing engine. It requires pure, refined fuel. It's dangerous, but it's brittle. One bad tank of gas, and the whole thing freezes up. Human biology is a rugged all-terrain diesel engine. It's dirty, it's noisy, and it stinks. But you can run it on damn near anything. They finally realized their assumed biological weakness was not a defect. It was an asset. It was a tough, inexorable engine of survival, pieced together by millennia of desperation. They were weak, yes. But their endurance was in depths untapped well, and the Alorans, in all their sterile perfection, had no clue. Hestian gazed at the autopsy anatomical chart of contaminant alpha when the priority comms request pinged, a cutting, insistent sound. He accepted it. A shining, faceless silver oval materialized on his holo display, the sigil of a high command administrator. Not Administrator 7, higher. Exosurgeon. A synthetic, ice-cold voice spoke each phrase, a beautifully shaped crystal of ice. Your 8th cycle of deprivation study. The doctrine foretold failure of the system by cycle 3. Account for this variance. Hestian shivered, a cold that had nothing to do with the station's frigidity curling deep into his bones. This was an audit. A career-killing, perhaps life-ending audit. These subjects are anomalously resilient. High Administrator, he stuttered, his carefully modulated voice trembling for the first time in decades. The biology is more complicated than our early models predicted. The ovoid on screen appeared to constrict, an impressive trick for a featureless form. Complexity is another name for inefficiency. Exosurgeon. The starvation doctrine is founded upon the universal constant of metabolic need. There are no outliers, only observational failures. Your assignment is to chronicle failure, not file absurdities. The voice fell, becoming even colder. Give a definite outcome. The Imperium does not need ambiguous research. Reinstate the doctrine or your project, and all related personnel will be reassessed for ongoing usefulness. The transmission dropped, leaving Hestian alone and immobile in the quiet laboratory. The pressure of the suggested threat weighed upon him, a palpable force in his chest. He was no longer a scientist on the brink of an intriguing discovery. He was an administrator on the brink of being rendered obsolete. His abstract academic terror had now soured into something much more primal and personal. Fear. He needed an outcome. He needed the humans dead. Now. The protocol had battered them down. Not physically. The constant flow of low-grade calories from the pipe and the wall cheese kept their bodies running. But in their minds, the seemingly endless gray walls, the reused air that never failed to have a faint metallic taste, the relentless gnawing hunger for something that finally had a taste like food. They sat together, the faint warmth of each other's bodies a small consolation against the hard metal floor. The talk turned, as it seemed to every time morale was at its lowest, to home. First thing I'm getting, Gibson said, his voice a low, reverent rumble that seemed to come from the center of the earth, is a double bacon cheeseburger from Fat Tony's on Orbital Station Epsilon. A beautiful, disgustingly inefficient stack of fat and protein, so greasy the bun turns see-through, with curly fries, the kind that are 50% crisp and 50% soft, and a chocolate shake so thick you have to eat it with a spoon for the first 10 minutes. Need gave a small, weary smile. A perfect bowl of tonkatsu ramen from that tiny restaurant in Neo-Tokyo Sector 4, the one with just a counter and 6 stools. The one that takes the excessively complicated 2-day method merely to prepare the broth. The pork belly that is so tender it melts on your tongue. The perfectly cooked soft-boiled egg. The freshly made noodles with just the right chew. They both turned to Maria. She remained silent for an extended period, gazing out at the gray wall as if she could see something on the other side. "Coffee," she said. At last, her voice soft but unyielding as Durasteel. Real coffee made from freshly ground beans, most likely from some hinterworld colony that still produces it in real dirt. Black, a rough, bitter, over-extracted brew so potent you can literally taste the color. Hot enough to burn my tongue. I'd like to sit down with a hot cup of black coffee and a technical manual for a new version of Fusion Core. For an instant, they were not prisoners. They were 3 hungry souls fantasizing about the complicated, untidy, inefficient, and marvelous things that made life worthwhile. The fantasy was not a solace. It was a tool. It honed the blunted edges of their determination into a razor edge. Maria stood up on her own. The moment of peaceful reflection was at an end. "All right," she said, her words as tough as drawn steel. "Dreamtime's finished. We've lived through it. Now we fight." Maria's scheme was straightforward, ruthless, and depended on the Elarans' deep arrogance. They required the guards to enter their cell. They required them to shatter their own sterile procedures. "They believe we're dying," she told him, her tone a soft whisper. "Hestian requires us to be dying. It's no longer a scientific observation for him. It's a professional imperative. We're going to deliver to him a performance he'll never forget." In the next scheduled cycle of observation, as they were sure Hestian would be observing his beloved data streams, Gibson stepped into the spotlight. He emitted a deep, anguished groan that was quite convincingly sounded, then fell to the ground. He started to convulse, his mighty limbs thrashing against the metal. For the finishing, grotesque touch, Anna had him chew up a wad of their dark green mold paste. He started frothing at the mouth, a nauseating combination of saliva and green-black spores trickling down his chin onto the immaculate floor. In his laboratory, Hestian stood by, his chest thudding in his chest. This was it, the terminal seizure that his models had signaled, the one that his doctrine was prophesizing. The data streams on his console went haywire, a cacophony of distress messages and biological error codes that validated his diagnosis. The doctrine was right. His career was preserved. His life was no longer at risk. "Get in there," he ordered the two guards who had been waiting outside the cell, his voice taut with a near-hysterical urgency. "Hook up the portable bioscanners. I have to capture every moment of this organism's extinction for the High Administration." "Sir, quarantine procedures prohibit." One of the guards started to say, its artificial voice uncertain. "Override them," Hestian snapped, his scholarly composure utterly abandoned. "That is an order from a chief exosurgeon. I require that data. Now." His desperation had pushed aside decades of cultivated caution. The guards, tied by the strict bonds of hierarchy, had no choice. They shared a fleeting, nervous look, then manually opened the cell door. The sterile seal was breached with a soft hiss of fleeing atmosphere. The two Alaran guards entered the cell. The atmosphere heavy with the scent of ozone, dirty human, and something faintly fungal, was a physical attack on their sensitive senses. One knelt down beside Gibson, still jerking, folding portable scanner into his hand. The other guard kept watch, its stance exuding discomfort. Then Gibson's seizure abruptly ceased. He burst upward as his hand flashed out and seized the kneeling guard's arm, and his other arm encircled its torso in a bone-shattering bear hug. A sickening crack as the guard's sleek, elegant armor buckled under the raw, brute power. At the same time, Maria and Anna attacked the second guard. Maria went low, tackling its long, skinny legs and sending it off balance. Anna, much quicker than she looked, rammed the sharpened rat bone deep into the exposed gap of its elbow joint. The guard grunted in shock and agony, staggering back. The guard that had been on its feet regained its balance and brought its stun baton in a smooth, economical arc. Gibson did not attempt to deflect it. He accepted the blow to his shoulder with a grunt of pain, the force dissipated by sheer muscle structure, and used the distraction to punch his own fist into the sharp point of the sternum. For the first 30 seconds, the Alaran's greater speed and strength were crushing. They advanced in a whirlwind of economical strikes, one aimed at each nerve center or joint. Then, a discrete change was visible. The slightest tremor in the limbs of the guard fighting against Maria and Anna. Its movements slowed fractionally. Its energy stores meant for short, decisive battles that resulted in a clean win were being depleted at a precipitous rate. Meanwhile, the humans, battered and bruised, were only getting started. They fought with a grinding, inexorable force forged of desperation and a week's worth of slowly smoldering trash. They lacked the sheer blast potential, but they could just keep going. The struggle was over within a minute. Gibson finally crushed the air out of his foe, which slumped unconscious on the floor. Maria deployed the second Alarin's own stun baton to incapacitate it, causing it to crumple in a heap. The cell was quiet except for the ragged, gasping breaths of 3 humans. They were battered, bleeding, and completely spent. But they were armed, and they were free. Hestian observed the pandemonium on his screens, a rush of icy fear washing over him, so intense it was as though he had physically been plunged into cold water. The data streams he had been following with such hope had gone flat as the portable scanners were crashed against a metal wall. Containment failed. He bellowed into his comms device, his voice an unhinged shriek of fear that was quite unlike his normally modulated tones. The Terran subjects are loose. They are ambulatory bioreactors, a walking plague of inefficiency. He struggled to send a ship-wide security alert. His panic-stricken eyes landed on the secondary screen he had left running, the one still showing the 3D anatomical model from the autopsy of Contaminant Alpha. The face of the preposterously long, coiled human intestines slowly revolved, ironically, a silent reminder of his own gargantuan ignorance. And in an instant of gruesome, mind-shattering lucidity, everything fell into place. The sacrilegious gut microbiome, the ingestion of non-food trash, the atmospheric inefficiencies, their maddening persistence. It was not inefficiency. It was resilience, ghastly, ugly, stinking, uncontrollable resilience. A system designed not for an ideal sanitary universe, but to survive any universe, to consume the stones and the soil and the trash, and convert it into energy for a machine that would just not perish. The whole basis of his science, his profession, his species' philosophy of biological perfection dissolved into dust. He spoke in a whisper, the words sticking in his throat as one, shattering truth seared through his brain, sealing over his arrogance. He realized at last the purpose of that outrageously long, obscene organ. It was not a defect. It was the entire point. Battling their way aboard was a succession of nasty, desperate fights in cramped maintenance tunnels and antiseptic service tunnels. They used the ship's blueprints they had extracted from a fallen guard's datapad, moving deep into the vessel's industrial bowels. Eventually, they burst through a pressure door into a huge maintenance hangar. The air reeked of ozone, industrial lubricant, and the cold, dead smell of vacuum-rated metal. And there it was, a squat, ugly, functional freighter parked in a maintenance cradle. On its side, lettered across, was Debris Collector 9. It was the most gorgeous thing Maria had ever laid eyes on. "That's okay," she gasped, racing up the ramp and leaving a trail of filth on the gleaming metal. She wedged into the pilot's seat, which was amazingly comfortable, and flipped the main power switch. The lights came on, but the engine continued to be obstinately quiet. A diagnostic warning flashed on the main screen in beautiful flowing letters, which Anna immediately deciphered. Bio-refined power core drained. Power-grade fuel needed for ignition sequence. They were stuck. The ship lacked fuel. Outside of the corridor that lay behind them, the metallic ringing of magnetic boots became louder, an oncoming tempest of vengeance. Maria didn't glimpse a dead end. She glimpsed a system with a broken input. She was out of the cockpit in a flash, a mad, crazy, and utterly foolish notion blooming in her mind. She sprinted to the ship's side and yanked open a maintenance hatch, exposing a huge cylindrical piece of equipment marked Organic Waste Reclamation Unit. Garbage disposal for the ship. Her dirty hands followed its heavy power cables. They did not feed into the main drive. They ran to a reserve power regulation system, next to the behemoth ignition capacitor on the engine. A wild, feral smile spread over her face. "The systems are pristine," she gasped, her voice reeling with the excitement of impending disastrous engineering. "They're meant for a clean burst of energy to prime the engine, a single perfect note." She struck the reclamation unit. "We're going to slam this capacitor with the electric equivalent of a mudslide. A crazy, dirty burst of raw, gritty power. So far beyond their design parameters, their safety nets won't even know what to do. Either it's going to work, or it's going to blow this whole deck up." She faced her team, her eyes afire with a passion that illuminated the dark hangar. "Nunna, give me all your organic trash you can scrounge. Gibson, bring me more rats and whatever else will burn." Afterward came a wild, desperate riot of confusion. Gibson was a one-man wrecking crew, ripping through the hangar that housed maintenance with the happy abandon of a man who'd been subsisting on wall insulation for a week. He ripped through bundles of a second, more combustible type of insulation. He smashed open crates of storage, discovering packets of Alarin bland nutrient paste, packets which they dumped unceremoniously into the hopper as a binder. He kicked over maintenance containers, discovering rags greasy with oil and industrial lubricant tubs. Ina, with unexpected urgency, scraped a dense green scum from a faulty water tank and gathered armloads of another type of mold that she discovered growing behind a loose panel. They tossed it all into the reclamation unit's broad hopper. Skitter cadavers they uncovered in the corners of the hangar: insulation, mold, algae, grease-stained rags, even the corpses of the guards they pulled along with them. "They're at the door," Gibson bellowed, wedging his bulk against the hangar door as metal on the other side started to buckle inward. "Give me a minute, Gibson," Maria shrieked back, her hands a whirlwind of activity. She discovered the primary power junction box alongside the capacitor, with a heavy wrench she had discovered. She pried off the cover with a shriek of anguished metal. There were the thick, copper-brown bus bars, shining and untainted. She seized the heavy rerouted cables from the reclamation unit. Electrical sparks erupted as she clamped raw cable ends onto the capacitor's primary bus bars by sheer physical force. It was a raw, savage link, an affront to all the principles of Alaron engineering. The capacitor whined, a keening hum that built and rose to a hysterical scream. It glowed a telling, overstressed cherry red. The hangar door creaked, a gap opening at the seam, a silver arm reaching out. "It's now or never," Gibson yelled, pushing the arm back with a last desperate appeal to the deity of busted gadgets and poor concepts. Maria slammed home, a great, jury-rigged bypass lever. The debris collector, 9, jolted into life with a noise that was like a giant cosmic belch. A stubborn block of a ship, its bow heavily armored for deflecting orbital junk. Thick, vile-smelling black and green smoke billowed from its engines. The whole ship shook crazily, then surged forward, bursting through its docking clamps with a deafening crash. Maria struggled with the controls, guiding the garbage scow's blunt prow towards the hangar doors. They exploded outward in a spasm of buckled metal, just as a sleek patrol cutter, a razor edge of a vessel called the Inevitable Truth, came into position to take a look. The cutter was at point-blank range, its advanced, long-range plasma cannons ineffective. Its captain gazed out of the main view screen in absolute frozen shock as the ugly, smoking freighter charged straight at them. It was a maneuver so crude, so primitive. It wasn't in any of their computer simulations. It was the tactical equivalent of a barroom brawl. Maria's sole objective was boarding. "Holding on to something," she yelled, her knuckles pale and white on the controls. The effect was disastrous. A screaming, whirring shriek of metal tearing that flung them all against their harnesses. Alarms howled from both vessels. The reinforced bow of the debris collector, 9, cut deep into the cutter's slender hull, opening a torn, sparking, barely survivable gap between the two ships. The battle for the Inevitable Truth was a vicious, hand-to-hand fight. The 3 men, grimy and greasy, bowled through the gap like angry specters. Gibson employed a hull plate bolted to his armor as a shield and club, cutting a path through the stunned and confused sailors. They were soldiers bred for neat, precise battle at a distance, and they were mentally unprepared for this degree of wild, up-close combat. The humans did not relent. Their endurance was the tipping point. They fought to the bridge, a maelstrom of desperate, brutish, and efficient savagery. They captured the bridge, secured the vessel, and closed the pressure doors astern, leaving their damaged, trash-powered escape craft still lodged in the hull of their new prize, like a dirty fork stuck in a piece of cake. Standing triumphant on the bridge of their seized ship, the team paused to catch their breath. Their ship remained quiet with only the labored breathing and the distant, antiseptic whine of advanced aileron machinery. The view screen reflected the star-dusted darkness of deep space. Gibson, being Gibson, quickly found the ship's paste dispenser. He turned it on, and a little, precisely uniform cylinder of beige paste came out. He prodded it, then broke off a tiny bit with his finger. He tasted it, and his face immediately twisted into a grimace of deep, soulful revulsion. "Tastes like plastic that's sad," he declared, spitting it onto the immaculate floor with a wet splash. "Huh?" He dug into a pouch on his belt and pulled out a small, charred piece of something. He had saved the roasted leg of a skitter. He took a contented, crunchy bite. He chewed reflectively for a moment, half closing his eyes in rapture. Nah," he said. To no one in general, holding up the rat leg as if to inspect it. "Needs salt." Slumped over the back of the captain's chair, Maria emitted a strangled, rough noise that could have been a laugh. For the first time in weeks, a smile, a real, genuine one, fleetingly brushed her dirty face. She glanced at her crew, at the helm of her new vessel, and set a course for the nearest Terran Alliance outpost, leaving behind a confused and shaken foe who had just learned a very smelly, very messy, and very long overdue lesson in the sublime, indomitable inefficiency of human biology.